The hall was filled with soft golden light that reflected off crystal chandeliers, casting tiny stars across the polished floors. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses floated through the air, creating a rhythm that matched the elegance of the night. People in expensive suits and sparkling dresses moved gracefully from one conversation to another, their smiles polite but practiced. At the center of the room, a grand piano sat under a small spotlight, gleaming as though it had been waiting for something magical to happen. No one touched it yet, but everyone admired it from a distance, their eyes lingering on its shiny surface. Among the crowd moved a young woman, carefully balancing a tray of champagne glasses. Her movements were precise and quiet, almost invisible. She was a waitress tonight, part of the background of this luxurious event, carrying drinks and smiles with the same ease she had learned over countless evenings. Her uniform was simple but neat, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns and tailored suits around her. She had practiced moving this way for years, blending into the surroundings so no one noticed her, so no one expected anything from her. And yet, her mind was alive with memories that no one could see. She paused for a moment behind a group of guests, letting her eyes wander to the piano again. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything else in the room. She had seen many grand pianos before, but there was something about this one. Its black lacquer shone like glass, and the keys were smooth and pristine, as if waiting for someone who could bring them to life. For a second, she imagined herself sitting there, her fingers brushing the keys, the music filling the hall. But she pushed the thought away. This was not her world. She was here to serve, not perform. Dreams like hers belonged somewhere else, in a life she had left behind. Carrying the tray again, she moved to a new group of guests. They smiled at her politely, some with curiosity, some with indifference. She handed out glasses with a practiced grace, murmuring polite words, and listening to small talk that seemed distant and unimportant. The laughter around her sounded both close and far away. She felt like she was watching the night through a thin veil, moving among people who lived in a world she could only touch from the edges. Yet, in those edges, she found small joys. The sparkle of the crystal glasses, the warm light of the chandeliers, the way the music from the background orchestra filled the air. Even if it was not her music, it reminded her that sound could move people in ways words never could. As she made her way around the room again, she caught the eye of a young girl standing near the piano. The girl was dressed in a tiny gown, her hair carefully curled, and she was staring at the piano with wide eyes. The waitress smiled at her, and the girl smiled back, a mix of awe and curiosity. It was a small connection, but it reminded the waitress of herself at that age, sitting in a quiet room, listening to the sound of a piano, dreaming of playing one day. She felt a pang of longing, a reminder of what she had left behind, but she also felt a quiet pride. Even if she was not on the stage, even if no one knew her story, she had survived. She had learned to move through the world with dignity, and she carried her dreams inside her like a secret treasure. The orchestra began a soft piece, the music floating gently through the room. Guests turned their attention to it, nodding in approval, sipping their drinks, and chatting quietly. She watched the way the music changed the mood, how people's expressions softened, how conversations slowed, how smiles became more genuine. Music had a power that went beyond wealth, beyond status, beyond appearances, could touch something deeper, something human. She carried that thought with her as she moved again, offering glasses, refilling drinks, smoothing napkins, always alert, always moving. The piano caught her eye once more, and she allowed herself a longer look this time. It seemed almost alive under the spotlight, as if it knew it was waiting for something extraordinary. She imagined herself sitting there, playing a piece she had practiced long ago in quiet rooms, her fingers dancing over the keys, creating a melody that could fill the entire hall. The thought made her heart beat faster, a mixture of excitement and fear. What if someone noticed her? What if she could not play as she remembered? What if the world was not ready for her music? These questions raced through her mind, but she pushed them aside. For now, she had her role to play, her duties to perform. The night was not hers, and yet, Every glance at the piano reminded her that her story was still alive, waiting for the right moment. She moved to a corner where a group of men were deep in conversation about business and art, their voices low but animated. She placed a tray of glasses on the table, careful not to interrupt, and stepped back. One of the men looked at her briefly, and she offered a polite nod. He nodded back, barely noticing her presence. That was the way of these nights. Invisible yet essential. She reminded herself that she was part of the evening, even if no one saw her. She kept moving as quietly and efficiently as she could, always aware of the music, the light, the atmosphere, and the piano. For a moment, she paused near the piano again, just long enough to feel its presence. The room seemed to slow around her, the chatter fading into a distant hum. She imagined the sound she could make, the music that could come from her hands. She closed her eyes for a second, letting herself feel the dream, the memory, the longing. Then she opened them, took a deep breath, and reminded herself of her role. The night was not yet hers, but the piano was waiting, and perhaps one day she would answer its call. The hours passed in a blur of service, of smiles, of careful movements. She moved from table to table, offering drinks, responding to requests, stepping aside to avoid collisions, always alert, always present but unseen. The wealth and elegance around her could not diminish the quiet fire inside her. The memory of music, the dream that refused to fade. The night continued, full of laughter and conversation, full of light and elegance. And yet, for her, it was also full of anticipation. Something was about to happen, something she could feel in the air, in the way the music lingered, in the way the piano seemed to call to her. She did not yet know what, but she knew that this night would be remembered, not just by the guests, but by her, in the secret corners of her heart where dreams lived quietly, waiting for the right moment to rise. She carried a tray of drinks through the room, but her mind was somewhere else, drifting back to a time when music was the center of her world. She remembered a small room in her childhood home, where an old upright piano had stood in the corner. She had spent hours there, her fingers pressing keys with a mix of curiosity and determination. The piano had been her companion, her teacher, and her escape from a life that often felt too heavy for someone so young. In those moments, she had believed that music could change everything, that it could lift hearts and even change the way people saw her. But life had a way of changing dreams. Circumstances forced her to leave the piano behind, to focus on survival, on helping her family, on finding work that paid the bills. Lessons were replaced by responsibilities. Practice hours replaced by long shifts and endless chores. Still, the memory of the piano, of the music she once played, never left her. It was tucked away inside her, like a secret treasure that no one else could touch. Even now, standing in the grand hall filled with wealth and laughter, that memory was alive, whispering to her that something more was possible. She moved past groups of guests laughing over stories she could not fully hear, their voices blending into a soft hum in the background. Her eyes, however, kept returning to the grand piano, glowing under the spotlight as if inviting her. She wondered who would play it tonight, who would be the one to fill the room with music that matched its beauty. She imagined herself sitting there, fingers moving with the ease of years of practice, her heart guiding the melody. The thought brought a smile to her face, even as she reminded herself to focus on her work. The piano was not hers yet, and the night was far from over. As she moved through the hall, she noticed the small details that made this event extraordinary. The table settings were immaculate, the flowers carefully arranged, and the golden light of the chandeliers reflecting in a way that made the room feel almost magical. Guests whispered compliments to each other, their eyes sometimes flicking toward the piano, clearly drawn to its elegance. She watched quietly, her role invisible but her awareness sharp. Every smile, every gesture, every note from the distant orchestra was a reminder of the world she was in, a world so different from the quiet rooms of her past. Her thoughts drifted again, this time to the people she had met along the way, those who had believed in her and those who had doubted her. She remembered the teacher who had once encouraged her to follow her passion, who had said that music could open doors she had never imagined. And she remembered the moments when others had laughed, when they had told her to give up, to focus on what was practical. Life had forced her to make choices, and she had done what she had to do. But the music had never left her. It had survived in quiet moments, in stolen breaths, in the corners of her mind where dreams refused to fade. As the night continued, she found herself near a table where an older gentleman was speaking about art and life with a small group. His voice was calm, thoughtful, and he seemed genuinely interested in the conversation. She paused to serve him a glass of wine, noticing the way he listened, the way his eyes softened when he spoke of beauty and creativity. For a brief moment, she felt a connection to the world he described, a world where talent and dedication were noticed and celebrated. It was a reminder that not all recognition was tied to wealth or status, that sometimes people could see the soul behind the skill. She moved on, continuing her work, yet her mind never left the piano. She could feel it calling to her, as if it knew the story it was meant to tell. The memory of her childhood practice returned vividly. The way her fingers had felt on the keys, the thrill of mastering a difficult passage, the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful from nothing. She thought about the pieces she had learned, the songs that had filled her small room with light and sound, and the dreams that had once felt so real. That music was still inside her, waiting for a moment to return to the world. As she carried another tray, she noticed a young man near the piano, talking quietly to someone about the evening's entertainment. His tone was dismissive, almost bored, as though the piano was just another decoration. She felt a quiet anger at that thought, not directed at him personally, but at the idea that something so beautiful could be overlooked, underestimated. It made her more determined to hold on to her own sense of worth, to remember that her abilities, her talent, her music were valuable, even if the world did not always recognize them. A small group of children entered the room, their excitement almost contagious. One of them ran to the piano, fingers itching to touch the keys, but an adult gently pulled him back. She watched the scene, feeling a mixture of amusement and longing. She remembered herself at that age, reaching for the piano, yearning to make it sing. The memory was sweet and bittersweet, a reminder of innocence lost but also of passion that never truly dies. As the evening progressed, she found moments to pause, to breathe, to let her mind drift back to the music she loved. She imagined the notes she could play, the songs that could fill the room, the way people might feel if they heard her play. It was a quiet fantasy, one she held close, a secret world that existed alongside her visible duties. And in that fantasy, she felt free, alive, and completely herself, a sharp contrast to the invisible role she played among the wealthy guests. The orchestra began another piece, and she allowed herself to truly listen this time. She followed the melody with her mind, imagining how it would feel to add her own music to it, to let her fingers create harmony that touched hearts. The sound seemed to echo inside her, awakening emotions she had kept buried for years. Hope, longing, joy, and a little bit of fear. Fear not of failure, but of the possibility that one day she might have a chance to play and that the moment would feel too big, too important, too overwhelming. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that every journey begins with small steps, even if those steps were just dreams for now. She moved to the side of the hall, placing glasses on a tray with care, and watched the guests as they enjoyed the music. Some were clearly moved, tapping fingers lightly on the table, nodding to the rhythm. Others were deep in conversation, oblivious to the beauty around them. She realized that not everyone would notice, not everyone would care, but that did not diminish the power of the music. It reminded her that art, talent, and dedication were not about recognition alone. They were about expression, about sharing something from within, whether or not the world acknowledged it. As she walked past the piano once more, she felt a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. The night was far from over, and she could sense that something significant was coming. The piano seemed to shine a little brighter, as if aware of her thoughts, as if waiting for the right moment to be played. She could almost hear the sound of her fingers on the keys, the melody rising, the room falling silent in awe. She smiled to herself, letting the image fill her mind. Even as she continued her duties, serving drinks, smiling, moving quietly among the guests. Her shift continued, but a part of her was elsewhere, living in the memory of music, the dream of performance, and the hope that one day, she would have the courage to play. The night was still young, and the piano was still untouched, but in her heart, she felt a sense of possibility, a quiet promise that one day, her music would not just be a memory. It would be heard, it would be felt, and it might even change the way people saw her. For now, she continued her work, invisible but aware, holding on to her secret dream, knowing that the night was far from over and that her story was only beginning to unfold. The evening had grown deeper, and the soft golden light in the hall seemed to glow warmer against the faces of the guests. Laughter and conversation filled the air, but there were moments of quiet too, when a sudden pause and chatter made the room feel like it was holding its breath. She carried a tray of sparkling wine past a group of guests who were focused on their own discussions, their eyes occasionally flicking toward the grand piano. She felt a pull in her chest, a gentle insistence from the instrument that tonight, perhaps, was different. A small commotion near the stage drew her attention. One of the musicians in the orchestra had dropped a sheet of music, and there was a pause as he bent down to pick it up. The conductor waved his hand, signaling the orchestra to wait, and the room fell into a brief, unexpected silence. Guests shifted in their seats, some glancing around curiously, others murmuring quietly. She paused with her tray, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. This was a moment of uncertainty, and in that pause, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A spark of courage, a whisper telling her that perhaps this was the moment she had been waiting for. Her mind raced. She thought about the hours of practice she had done in secret, the melodies she had memorized, the songs that had filled her quiet rooms with light. She imagined herself at the piano, fingers dancing over the keys, bringing to life the music she had carried inside her for so long. The idea was terrifying and thrilling all at once. What if she failed? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? But the other part of her, the part that had survived years of struggle, the part that still loved music more than anything, urged her forward. It was time to make a choice. She set the tray down carefully on a side table and took a deep breath. Guests continued to chatter softly, unaware of the internal battle she was facing. She took a few steps toward the grand piano, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands slightly trembling. Each step felt heavier and lighter at the same time, weighted with fear but lifted by hope. The spotlight above the piano seemed to shine a little brighter, as if encouraging her, as if it had been waiting for her all along. As she approached, a young boy near the piano reached out to touch the keys, and she gently guided his hand away. "Careful," she said softly, smiling at him. "This is a special moment." The boy nodded, wide-eyed, sensing the importance of what was about to happen, even if he didn't fully understand it. She climbed onto the bench, her fingers hovering above the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her touch. The world seemed to hold its breath with her, and in that quiet, she felt a strange sense of peace. Her mind cleared, focusing solely on the music she had practiced for years. She remembered the first notes, the rhythm, the flow, and slowly, she let her fingers fall onto the keys. A single note filled the room, pure and clear, breaking the silence in a way that made heads turn. Guests paused mid-conversation, their eyes drawn to the piano and the young woman seated before it. Her fingers moved with grace, with confidence, with a skill that belied her years as a waitress and the invisibility she had learned to wear so well. The first few chords were simple, familiar, a way to ease herself into the performance. But as she continued, the music grew richer, more complex, carrying emotion with every note. Her heart poured into the melody, telling a story of dreams held close, of struggles endured, and of a passion that refused to be silenced. The room seemed to transform around her. The soft murmurs of conversation faded, replaced by the pure sound of the piano weaving through the air. Guests leaned forward, their faces reflecting surprise and awe, as if they were seeing her for the first time not as a waitress, but as an artist. Some tried to whisper compliments to each other, but their voices seemed small compared to the music. They were captivated, unable to look away. The young woman felt the energy of the room shift, the way it responded to her playing, how it seemed to breathe with her music. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the connection, the power of the sound, the magic that was happening not just in her fingers, but in the hearts of everyone listening. Time seemed to stretch and bend as she played, each note carrying a part of her story. She remembered nights alone with her piano, practicing until her fingers ached, dreaming of a moment like this. And now, here she was, filling a grand hall with a melody that no one had expected, touching lives she had only glimpsed from the edges before. She felt a rush of emotion, a combination of fear, joy, and release. For the first time in years, she was no longer invisible. She was seen fully through the music that spoke for her. A few guests had tears in their eyes, moved by the honesty and beauty of her performance. Some leaned closer to hear more clearly, their attention fully captured. Even the orchestra, waiting for their cue, seemed to pause, their musicians quietly listening to the unexpected talent unfolding before them. The conductor's hand hovered in midair, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment continue. It was a rare silence that spoke louder than applause, a collective breath held in admiration. She continued to play, letting her fingers remember every lesson, every piece she had ever learned. The notes flowed effortlessly, yet they carried weight, emotion, and intention. Each chord was a word, each melody a sentence, telling the story of her life in a language that transcended words. She felt connected to every person in the room, even though they had never known her before, even though they had never expected this. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between her world and theirs, between her dreams and the reality she had created tonight. As the piece reached its climax, she felt a surge of energy, a final push that demanded everything she had to give. Her fingers moved faster, yet with control, the music swelling to fill every corner of the hall. Guests leaned forward in their seats, some holding their breath, all caught in the spell of the performance. The young woman played with everything she had, letting the music carry her story, her hopes, and her courage. The last notes lingered in the air, fading slowly, leaving a silence that felt almost sacred. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the room erupted into applause. It was not the polite clapping of social obligation, but genuine, heartfelt recognition. Guests rose from their seats, some cheering, others whistling, all expressing amazement at what they had just witnessed. The young woman felt a rush of relief and joy, mixed with disbelief. She had done it. She had stepped into the light, shared her music, and touched hearts in a way she had only dreamed of. For a moment, she simply sat there, taking in the reaction, her chest still pounding, her fingers tingling from the performance. The world seemed different now, larger, brighter, and full of possibility. People approached her, offering compliments, asking questions, expressing admiration she had never experienced before. She smiled, humbled and overwhelmed, realizing that tonight had changed more than just her own perspective. It had shifted the way everyone in the room saw her. She was no longer just a waitress. She was an artist, a storyteller, a musician who had brought beauty to life in a way no one expected. The orchestra finally resumed, but their music now felt like a companion to what she had created rather than a replacement. Guests continued to talk, but their words carried a new tone, a recognition of talent, of courage, of the unexpected magic that can appear when someone dares to step forward. The young woman stepped down from the piano bench, her legs trembling slightly, her heart still full of the music and the emotions it had carried. She returned to her duties, but now the walk through the hall felt different. She held herself differently, with a quiet pride and newfound confidence that could not be taken away. Even as she moved among the guests, serving drinks and smiling politely, she could feel the impact of her performance lingering in the air. The piano, once an untouchable object of admiration, now seemed to hum with satisfaction, as if it too recognized that the right hands had played it tonight. She walked past it one last time before returning to the service area, casting a glance that was both farewell and promise. The night was far from over, but the moment she had created, the magic she had shared, would not be forgotten by anyone in that hall, including herself. The applause from the performance still echoed in the grand hall, and the young woman felt a mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion. Her hands were still tingling from the energy of the music, her heart still racing with the emotions she had poured into every note. She had stepped beyond the role that life had assigned her and, for a few breathtaking minutes, had been entirely herself. An artist, a storyteller, a creator of something beautiful. Yet even as the crowd continued to react, she returned to her duties, carefully balancing trays, refilling glasses, and offering polite smiles. The night had changed, but she remained mindful of her position in the room. Guests whispered among themselves, sharing their astonishment. Some leaned toward one another, their expressions wide with disbelief, recounting the music they had just heard. The young woman moved quietly past them, listening only in fragments, but even those fragments made her chest swell with pride. For the first time, she had seen people truly see her, not just as someone serving drinks, but as someone with talent, passion, and courage. The recognition felt like a gentle warmth, spreading through her like sunlight after a long, cold winter. Her mind wandered back to the small, quiet rooms of her childhood, where she had first fallen in love with music. She remembered practicing in secret, sometimes late at night, letting the sounds fill the walls and her imagination. She thought of the teacher who had encouraged her, who had shown her that even in a world that seemed indifferent, beauty and talent could shine if nurtured. And she remembered the moments of doubt, when life's challenges had pressed down on her, forcing her to abandon the piano, to work and survive instead of dream. But tonight, for the first time in years, those memories converged with reality. She had taken a chance, and it had mattered. As she moved through the crowd, she noticed small gestures of recognition. A few guests gave her a respectful nod, others offered quiet words of admiration. Some even reached out to shake her hand. She responded with gentle smiles, letting herself feel the impact without arrogance. It was a delicate balance. She wanted to acknowledge the recognition but not let it overwhelm her. The night was still unfolding, and the piano, that gleaming instrument at the center of it all, still seemed to hold a quiet promise, as if reminding her that this was only the beginning. Nearby, a group of children who had been watching from a distance began to chatter excitedly. One of them turned to a parent and whispered about the performance, describing the music with wide-eyed enthusiasm. The young woman caught the words and smiled to herself, remembering how she had once been that child, captivated by the power of sound, dreaming of being the one to make the music. She realized that tonight, she had not only touched the adults who filled the hall, but had also sparked inspiration in those young hearts. It was a reminder that music, like dreams, could ripple outward in unexpected ways. She paused near the piano, just long enough to let her gaze linger on the polished surface. It seemed to reflect more than just the light of the chandeliers. It reflected the possibility of everything she had kept inside. She imagined herself returning to this hall, not as a waitress, but as a performer, sharing her music with people who would listen and feel every note. The thought brought both a smile and a nervous flutter in her stomach. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the spark had been lit, and she knew it would not be extinguished. Her attention was drawn to a table where several guests were engaged in conversation about art and creativity. They spoke with a tone of genuine curiosity and appreciation, their words more thoughtful than the usual polite chatter. She felt a subtle connection to the conversation, even from her position in service. It reminded her that talent and passion could resonate with people in ways that money and status could not. Recognition was not always about applause. It was about acknowledgement, understanding, and shared experience. She carried that thought with her as she moved through the room, more aware than ever of the invisible threads that connected her to those around her. The orchestra had resumed playing, a gentle background melody filling the space with calm elegance. She moved with her tray, allowing the music to guide her movements, letting it settle her nerves. She could still feel the adrenaline of her performance, but now it was tempered with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had dared to step forward, and the world had responded. It was a feeling she would carry long after the night ended, a reminder that courage, even in small doses, could change everything. As she refilled glasses and offered polite smiles, she noticed a few of the older guests approaching her cautiously. Their expressions were curious, respectful, and slightly hesitant, as if they were not sure how to address someone they had just witnessed creating something so extraordinary. One of them spoke softly, complimenting her on the music, on the emotion, on the courage it took to perform in front of a room full of strangers. She accepted the words with humility, feeling the weight of their sincerity. It was a validation she had longed for in quiet moments, a confirmation that the sacrifices, the practice, and the patience had all mattered. She returned to a corner of the room, taking a brief moment to catch her breath. The golden light of the chandeliers seemed warmer here, softer, almost embracing her. She allowed herself to close her eyes for a second, letting the memory of her fingers on the keys, the sound of the piano filling the hall, and the expressions of awe on the faces of the guests wash over her. It was a moment of reflection, a quiet acknowledgement that she had stepped into her own power, even if only for a few minutes. And in that power, she found something deeper than applause. It was the knowledge that she had followed her heart, that she had shared her gift without fear, and that she had created a memory that would linger long after the music ended. The guests continued to talk and move, but she moved with a new awareness. Each gesture, each step, each interaction carried a subtle confidence, a sense of self-respect that had been dormant for too long. She realized that the performance had done more than impress the audience. It had changed her. She felt a quiet joy in knowing that she could no longer be defined solely by her role as a waitress. The piano, the music, and the courage to step forward had shifted something within her, a transformation that was invisible to the eye but powerful in its effect. She approached a table of younger guests who had been whispering excitedly about the performance. They looked at her with curiosity, eyes wide and attentive, as though they were eager to hear a story. She smiled gently and nodded, understanding that in some small way, she had given them a gift, the realization that talent, passion, and courage could shine in unexpected places. Their fascination reminded her that inspiration often starts quietly, with a single moment of connection, and that the ripple effects could last far longer than she might ever know. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the hall shifted subtly. Guests moved with a sense of warmth and connection, conversations carrying a new energy born from the experience they had just shared. The young woman moved among them, aware of the difference she had made, even if only in small ways. Each polite nod, each whispered compliment, each glance of admiration reminded her that the world could change in an instant when someone chose to step forward and share their gift. She returned to the side of the room where she had first approached the piano. Her fingers itched slightly, remembering the sensation of the keys beneath her touch, the rhythm of the notes, the flow of the melody that had filled the hall. She imagined what it would feel like to sit there again, to play another piece, to continue sharing the music that had been her companion for so many years. The thought was exhilarating, almost intoxicating, and she realized that the night had opened a door she could not close, a possibility she could not ignore. For the rest of her shift, she moved with quiet grace, carrying trays, refilling glasses, and interacting with the guests in her usual polite and professional manner. Yet beneath the surface, she carried a newfound sense of self, a quiet confidence, and the memory of the music that had transformed the room. She understood now that courage, once summoned, could not easily be forgotten, and that even small acts of bravery could leave lasting impressions. As the night drew closer to its end, she took a moment to glance once more at the grand piano. The spotlight still illuminated it, highlighting the polished black surface and gleaming keys. She imagined herself returning to it, fingers poised to create beauty once more, heart full of hope and determination. The performance had been a turning point, a moment that had shifted the way she saw herself and the way the world saw her. It was a night she would always remember, a night when the ordinary became extraordinary, and when a single act of courage had made a world of difference. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the hall, the lingering notes of her music in the air, and the quiet admiration of the guests around her. The experience had changed her in ways that words could not fully capture. She understood now that talent and passion, when combined with courage, could transcend roles, expectations, and limitations. The night had been more than a performance. It had been a revelation, a reminder that even in ordinary circumstances, extraordinary moments could unfold if one had the heart to pursue them. The applause from her performance had long since settled into whispers and murmurs, but the memory of it lingered in the room like a gentle echo. The young woman continued her work with calm focus, carrying trays, offering polite smiles, and ensuring the guests were well taken care of. Yet beneath the surface, she felt a quiet excitement, a sense that the night had shifted in ways no one could have anticipated. The piano had been her voice for a few precious minutes, and though her hands now carried glasses instead of keys, her heart still danced with the music. A small group of influential guests approached, their faces a mixture of curiosity, respect, and genuine admiration. They had been watching her during the performance, and now, cautiously, they engaged with her. Their words were measured, thoughtful, and sincere, praising not just her skill, but the emotion she had poured into the music. She responded with a quiet smile, humbled and somewhat overwhelmed, realizing that her small act of courage had reached people in a way she had only ever dreamed of. She understood that this night was no longer just a memory. It had become a turning point, a moment that could shape the future. She moved past a table where a young couple whispered excitedly to each other, clearly discussing the performance. Their conversation was full of awe and wonder, the kind of genuine reaction she had longed to see. She caught a few words: incredible, so talented, unexpected, and a warmth spread through her chest. For years, she had wondered if anyone would ever truly see her, and tonight, she realized that people could notice, appreciate, and even be inspired by her, even in unexpected circumstances. As she continued to serve, her mind wandered to her past, to the countless hours she had spent alone with her piano. Each memory was vivid: the first time she learned a difficult chord, the way her fingers had grown accustomed to the keys, the quiet satisfaction of mastering a challenging piece. Those moments, once private and personal, had now found their audience. The music she had nurtured in secret had become a bridge, connecting her world to the world of the guests in a way that transcended wealth, status, and expectations. She approached a table where a group of older guests were discussing art and performance. Their tone was unusually sincere, a mix of curiosity and respect. One of them leaned slightly forward and spoke softly, acknowledging the courage it took to perform unexpectedly, the depth of feeling in every note, and the rare talent that had emerged in such an ordinary moment. The young woman nodded, quietly accepting their words, feeling the subtle but powerful affirmation of her efforts. It was a confirmation she had longed for in quiet moments, a recognition that went beyond applause. The orchestra continued to play softly in the background, their music now blending seamlessly with the memory of her own performance. She moved through the room, carrying trays with precision, yet her thoughts remained intertwined with the melodies she had created moments before. The hall seemed different to her now, not because the guests had changed, but because she had changed. Her perception of herself, her possibilities, and her potential had been altered by a single act of courage, a single decision to embrace her passion despite fear and uncertainty. A young boy who had been watching her from a distance approached, tugging gently at a parent's sleeve. His eyes were wide, filled with awe and curiosity. He had witnessed something remarkable, even if he could not fully articulate it. She smiled down at him, understanding the spark of inspiration that passed from one generation to the next. It reminded her that her music was not just about recognition or praise. It was about connection, about touching hearts, and about showing that passion and talent could exist anywhere, regardless of circumstance. She paused near the piano again, her fingers itching slightly as she remembered the feel of the keys beneath her touch. The instrument, still gleaming under the spotlight, seemed almost alive, as if it remembered the performance and the courage it had taken to bring the music to life. She imagined returning to it, playing again, letting her emotions flow freely, and sharing her story through sound. The thought was thrilling, almost overwhelming, but it filled her with hope and determination. She realized that the night had opened doors she had never imagined, doors that led to opportunities and possibilities that were previously out of reach. Guests continued to mingle, their conversations filled with admiration and curiosity about the young woman who had surprised them all. Some approached with questions about her background, her training, and the journey that had brought her to the piano tonight. She answered politely, carefully choosing her words, knowing that each interaction was part of the new narrative unfolding around her. The recognition was both humbling and empowering, reinforcing the idea that courage and talent, when combined, could resonate far beyond what she had ever imagined. She moved to another table where a group of women were discussing their own experiences with creativity and self-expression. Their words were thoughtful, their tone encouraging, and she felt a subtle connection to them. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could pursue her passion openly, without fear or hesitation. The idea was exhilarating, and she felt a sense of possibility that she had not experienced in years. The night, which had begun as just another shift, had transformed into a catalyst for change, not just in her life, but potentially in the lives of those who had witnessed her music. Her thoughts returned to the small room of her childhood, the old upright piano, and the countless hours she had spent practicing in secret. Each memory was a reminder of how far she had come, of the resilience and dedication that had carried her through difficult times. The piano tonight had been more than an instrument. It had been a symbol of hope, a vessel for her dreams, and a bridge between her past and the possibilities of the future. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey, for the courage to step forward, and for the way her music had touched the hearts of others. She paused briefly to watch the orchestra, now fully engaged in their own performance. The music complemented the lingering echoes of her piano, creating a tapestry of sound that filled the hall with warmth and elegance. She realized that her performance had not only affected the guests but had also influenced the atmosphere, changing the way people experienced the evening. The power of music, she understood, was not just in the notes themselves but in the emotions they evoked, in the connections they fostered, and in the courage they inspired. As she continued her duties, she felt a quiet sense of pride in the way the guests responded to her presence. Their admiration was subtle, respectful, and genuine, a reflection of the impact she had made. She understood that her role had shifted, even if only slightly, and that the night would be remembered not just for the event itself, but for the unexpected, breathtaking performance that had captured everyone's attention. The realization filled her with a sense of fulfillment, a knowledge that her courage had created something lasting and meaningful. A few guests approached her directly, expressing their admiration in words and gestures. They asked about her training, her inspirations, and the music she had chosen to perform. She responded with humility, acknowledging the journey that had brought her here while remaining mindful of the boundaries of the evening. Each interaction reinforced the idea that her performance had transcended the ordinary, leaving a mark that would linger long after the night ended. It was a powerful reminder that talent and courage, when shared authentically, could resonate deeply with others. She returned to a corner of the hall, taking a moment to reflect on the events of the evening. The golden light of the chandeliers cast a soft glow, creating a sense of serenity amid the bustling activity. She allowed herself to close her eyes for a second, letting the memory of her fingers on the keys, the flow of the music, and the reactions of the guests wash over her. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a recognition of her own strength, resilience, and the power of pursuing one's passion despite fear and uncertainty. The night continued, and she moved with a renewed sense of purpose. Each step, each gesture, each interaction carried the subtle confidence that had been awakened by her performance. She understood that her life had shifted in ways that could not be undone, that the experience had opened doors to new opportunities, and that her story was no longer confined to the role of a waitress. The music had revealed her true self, and she was determined to honor that revelation, carrying it forward with humility, courage, and dedication. As the evening drew closer to its conclusion, she glanced once more at the grand piano. The instrument seemed to radiate a quiet satisfaction, as if acknowledging the courage, skill, and emotion that had been poured into its keys. She imagined returning to it, playing again, and sharing her music with the world. The thought filled her with excitement and anticipation, reinforcing the understanding that this night had been more than a performance. It had been a turning point, a moment of transformation, and a glimpse into the possibilities that lay ahead. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the hall, the lingering echoes of her music, and the subtle admiration of the guests. The experience had changed her, revealing the power of courage, passion, and authenticity. She understood that even small acts of bravery could create ripples, inspiring others and opening doors that had previously seemed closed. The night had been extraordinary, not just for the guests, but for her. For the way it had allowed her to reclaim her voice, her dreams, and her sense of self. It was a night that would be remembered, a night when courage met opportunity, and when a single, breathtaking performance left an indelible mark on everyone present. The night was slowly winding down, and the golden light of the chandeliers softened as the guests prepared to leave. The music of the orchestra had faded into quiet background notes, leaving a warm hum that filled the grand hall. The young woman moved through the room with a calm awareness, carrying trays and offering polite smiles. But beneath the surface, her heart was still alive with the energy of her performance. Tonight had been extraordinary, a moment that had shifted everything, and she felt the weight and joy of it in every step she took. As guests began to make their farewells, she noticed the subtle expressions of respect and admiration that lingered on their faces. Some paused to speak with her, asking about the piano, her training, and the inspiration behind her performance. Each interaction, though brief, carried a weight she had never experienced before. They were no longer just polite acknowledgments. They were genuine recognition of her talent, courage, and the emotions she had shared through her music. She responded with humble smiles and quiet words, feeling the impact of the night settle deeply within her. She paused for a moment near the piano, her fingers itching as she remembered the feel of the keys beneath her hands. The spotlight still shone softly on the instrument, highlighting its polished surface and gleaming keys. She imagined returning to it, sitting on the bench once more, and playing freely, letting her emotions pour into every note. The memory of the performance, the sound, the reactions, and the joy it had brought filled her with a sense of fulfillment that she had longed for all her life. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes and savor the feeling, the sense that she had touched something meaningful. A few guests lingered near the stage, speaking quietly among themselves. Their expressions were thoughtful, filled with admiration and surprise. Some had been moved to tears, others had been inspired, and all seemed to recognize the rarity of what they had witnessed. She watched them with a quiet satisfaction, understanding that her music had left a mark, that the courage to step forward had created a ripple effect she could not fully measure. It was a profound reminder that talent, when shared authentically, could impact people in ways beyond immediate recognition. Her mind drifted back to her past, to the small rooms where she had first learned to play the piano. The hours of practice, the quiet determination, and the dreams that had been tucked away for so long all seemed to converge into this one night. She realized that every moment of struggle, every sacrifice, and every late-night practice had led her here. The music she had carried in secret had finally found an audience, and in doing so, it had transformed her perception of herself and her possibilities. She felt a deep gratitude for the journey, for the courage she had summoned, and for the opportunity to share her gift. As she continued her duties, she noticed several guests approaching her with more direct admiration. They spoke of potential opportunities, of invitations to perform, and of connections that could help her share her music more broadly. The conversation was exciting yet grounding, reminding her that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. She responded with humility, carefully considering each word, aware that while the night had been remarkable, the path forward would require patience, dedication, and continued courage. Still, the possibilities stretched before her like an open horizon, and she felt ready to step into them. A young girl approached, wide-eyed and curious, asking questions about the piano and the performance. The young woman smiled, kneeling slightly to meet the child's gaze. She spoke softly, encouraging the girl to pursue her passions, to practice, and to embrace courage. In that brief exchange, she recognized the full circle of inspiration. How one moment of bravery could ignite another. How sharing one's gift could plant seeds for the future. It was a powerful reminder that music, like hope, could move quietly but leave lasting impressions. The hall began to empty, leaving only a few lingering guests and the staff moving to clean and prepare for the end of the night. The young woman walked past the piano one last time, fingers lightly brushing the keys as she imagined the sound they could make. The instrument seemed almost alive, resonating with the energy she had shared. She felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the piano but to the music, to the people who had listened, and to the part of herself that had finally stepped forward. It was a quiet, deeply satisfying closure, a recognition that the night had been more than an event. It had been a turning point. She moved toward the exit, the golden light now softer, more reflective, mirroring the calm in her heart. Staff were tidying the tables, guests were saying final goodbyes, and the hall held a sense of serenity, as if acknowledging the extraordinary moment that had taken place. She felt a quiet pride in the impact she had made, a fulfillment that could not be measured by applause alone. The night had changed her, revealing the strength and courage that had always been within her, and she understood that this was only the beginning of a new journey. Outside, the cool air greeted her as she stepped into the night, carrying the memory of the hall, the music, and the guests with her. The city lights sparkled like tiny stars, reflecting the glow she felt inside. For a moment, she stood still, letting the experiences of the evening settle into her mind and heart. The performance had been more than an act. It had been a statement of who she was, a reclamation of her voice, and a declaration that dreams, even long held and secret, could become reality with courage and determination. She walked slowly toward her home, the streets quiet, the city alive in its own rhythm. Memories of the evening replayed in her mind. The applause, the expressions of admiration, the reactions of children and adults alike. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a recognition that she had stepped into her own power, embraced her talent, and shared it with the world. The night had been extraordinary, a rare moment where preparation, courage, and opportunity converged to create something unforgettable. As she entered her small apartment, she paused to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The piano in her childhood room, the countless hours of practice, the dreams she had kept alive in secret, all of it had culminated in tonight's performance. She realized that the courage to act, to share her music despite fear and doubt, had transformed her perspective. She was no longer invisible, no longer defined solely by her role as a waitress. She was recognized, admired, and most importantly, she recognized herself in a new light. Sitting down for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the future. Invitations to perform, opportunities to connect with other musicians, and the chance to share her gift more broadly all seemed within reach. She felt a quiet determination to continue pursuing her passion, to embrace every opportunity with humility and dedication, and to remember the courage that had carried her through this extraordinary night. The experience had not only changed the way others saw her, but had also reshaped her understanding of what was possible in her life. She thought about the young children who had watched her, the curious faces of guests who had been inspired, and the subtle but powerful impact of her music on everyone in the room. She realized that sharing her gift had consequences beyond the immediate recognition. It had planted seeds of inspiration, hope, and courage that could grow in ways she might never witness. The night had been a reminder that talent, when shared authentically, could resonate deeply, and that courage, when acted upon, could create ripples far beyond what one might imagine. As she prepared to rest, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for her journey, for the challenges that had shaped her, for the talent she had nurtured, and for the courage she had found within herself. The piano, the hall, the guests, and the performance had all contributed to a moment of transformation. a night that would live in her memory forever. She understood that this was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter, one in which she could embrace her talent, her passion, and the opportunities that lay ahead. She lay down for a moment, letting the quiet of her apartment surround her. The events of the evening replayed gently in her mind, like a melody that lingered long after the last note had been played. She smiled softly, knowing that she had claimed a moment that was uniquely hers, that she had stepped forward with courage, and that her music had touched the hearts of others. It was a night that would remain with her forever, a night that marked the turning point from invisibility to recognition, from doubt to confidence, from quiet dreams to visible, shared reality. The young woman closed her eyes, feeling the warmth and satisfaction of the evening settle deeply into her heart. The piano, the performance, and the reactions of the guests had created a lasting memory, one that would inspire her to continue pursuing her passion, to embrace opportunities, and to trust in her own abilities. She knew that the night had changed not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself, and that realization was more valuable than any applause or recognition. It was the affirmation of her worth, her talent, and her courage. As sleep gently approached, she reflected on the extraordinary journey of the evening, the transformation of an ordinary night into a night to remember, the power of music to connect and inspire, and the courage it had taken to step into the light. The experience had been a reminder that even in ordinary circumstances, extraordinary moments could unfold when one dared to embrace their gift, trust in their talent, and share it authentically. It was a night that would forever remain in her heart, a night that marked the beginning of a new chapter filled with hope, possibility, and the enduring power of music.